Hello and welcome to this special Workplace Week episode of IWFM's Navigating Turbulent Times. I'm Simone Fenton-Jarvis. I'm the Workplace Services Consultancy Director over at RICO, and I'm going to be your host today. So far in the series, there's been about 25 episodes of Navigating Turbulent Times now. And so far in the series, we've explored different aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact on the workplace and FM, as well as, all the key issues around the profession as well, things like such as well-being. Today, we're going to focus on agile working, very much a concept it's not a new concept, it's been around a while, and what is maybe the predominant model for the workplace and how we can make sure that works for the people in the organisations. When COVID-19 kind of hit and the lockdown measures came into place back in March, which feels like a long time ago now, millions of workers were obviously thrown into a remote working kind of experiment at the time. People that just hadn't worked from home previously. According to all the ONS kind of figures from April, it was actually 46.6% of people in employment were doing some kind of their work from home, and 86% were doing it because of coronavirus. So obviously that's quite large stats there. Well, there kind of continues to be so much uncertainty. It's safe to say that remote working, I guess, has become part of the norm for so many people. But there's still a time and a place for the office, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Some of the experiences, some of the stats that are coming back. IWFM did some research with YouGov, and from the research that's came back there, things like 73% of people saying that they want some kind of flexible working option into the future. So that's obviously quite another large statistic. We've then got just over half at 51% saying that they felt working from home, and now they've experienced working from home, going back into a corporate office may feel slightly unnecessary. So what is all that kind of big questions around what is the future of the office is going to be quite crucial. There's obviously then the changing kind of nature of work and what technology is doing to the workplace. So there's lots of things kind of impacting this. So today we're going to very much explore how agile working, although it's been around for a while, it's very much come to the forefront over the last few months. And where we're at the moment is that we've got a massive opportunity for transformation and change, and how we do things. And this webinar will ultimately set out the benefits of agile working, unpick maybe some of the confusion between things like agile working, flexible working and remote working, and just discuss some of the wider ramifications as well. So today we've got 4 people on the panel, and I'm going to just let them introduce themselves. So firstly, Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm Andrew Mawson. I'm one of the founders of Advanced Workplace Associates back in 1992. So just shows you how long this subject has actually been in play. I guess my start point on all this has been, this is kind of the way the world has been heading for quite some time, and I think this whole pandemic has brought it into real focus. I guess the only other thing I'd like to say is a big thank you really to IWFM for supporting Workplace Week as enthusiastically as they have done this year and on previous years, and it's all going very well. So lots of people getting involved from all over the world this time. So thank you ever so much for your support.
Thank you. Over to Maud.
Hi, I'm Maud Santamaria. I'm the Workplace Experience Director for MACE. I love those subjects, about agile working, flexible working, remote working, activity-based working. And I think sometimes we make a big deal out of it, and it's important to make sure that everybody understands, everybody's going to be, that has to deal with it, that understand those terms. And to me, I have to say on the agile working specifically, it's all about the trust. And maybe what kind of COVID has, I was going to say allowed, but almost forced us to happen. What COVID has forced to happen is that trust has given to employees to have agile working. So excited to talk about it.
Great. And we've got Harpreet.
Hi, I'm Harpreet Garawal, and I'm the news editor at Facilitate magazine, formerly FM World. So most people probably used to reading my work more than seeing my face or hearing my voice, and this is my first webinar actually. I'm happy to be here, and thank you IWFM for inviting me. I've written a lot about facilities management and workplace related topics over the years since I've been at Facilitate, as well as the more operational details of how to run buildings. I'm actually trained as a journalist, and I've also written about social, economic, and physical regeneration. So I have an idea of where facilities management kind of sits in the wider arena of the built environment, and look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Great. Last but not least, we've got Dan.
Thanks, Simone. Yeah, Dan Wakelin. I'm an associate at Hennigan Consulting Group. So I work with a number of clients on their workplace strategy and change management programs. And I am looking forward, as everyone is, to talking more about agile working. We have been talking about it for a very long time. And I think what's exciting now is that there are organizations who are or even leaders in organizations sort of listening to what benefits it could bring when they may not have been previously. So we have a real opportunity to make the most of that, really.
Thank you. So just to remind everybody, we're going to have questions and answers at the end. So feel free to just submit questions as we talk. We'll probably have a good 15 minutes at the end. So yeah, don't be shy. And the first question I'm going to kind of pose to the group is, I remember must have been about 10 years ago now, I remember myself Googling what was the difference between agile working, flexible working, remote working. And I actually came across Andrew's website. So I'm going to actually throw this question over to him because it feels like it's only well and true that it should start with him, because I think that's where my journey probably started quite a while ago. So Andrew, what for you, what are the differences, and what are the kind of how do things differ between the different terms as well?
Yeah, I think one of the problems with this subject is it has been confounded by a bit of confusion around different terms, and some of those terms have been used, if you like, by different disciplines as well. So the term flexible working has tended to be used more to talk about sort of time dimension, which I think has been more linked to the HR community. So things like term time contracts, part-time working, all those sorts of things fitted into something called flexible working. And then agile work, again, is very confused because, of course, the term is also used in the IT industry to mean something completely different around the way that people design software. But in agile working, we define agile working really as a kind of a spectrum, if you like. From on the one hand, people who work all their time in the office every day during the same time slots, to people who are working in a variety of time slots away from the office and away from anywhere. And along the way, there are various different stopping off points. So, for me, it's all about applying mobility and enabling people to choose different times and different places to do stuff, that will work well for them, and they also work well for their colleagues and their organisation. So that's kind of the way we would see it. The remote working is an interesting. I've always felt it's the wrong term. Really, remote working feels like you're a long way away, and I think with some of the technologies that we have around us today, like Zoom and Teams and Citrix and all those sorts of things, working away from each other doesn't, for me, have to mean working remotely. I mean, in our own business, we have about 50 odd associates around the world now, and I can tell you they don't feel remote at all. We're spending a lot of time together. It's just in the same physical space. So, that's probably my best shot at this. And I hope that is in line with what you saw on our website 10 years ago. Anyway.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Whether it's still there or not, we'll have a sneaky peek later on, I guess.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, what are your thoughts around, how, if we're going to implement things like agile working? And I guess we've definitely learned very quickly over the last few months that the organisations that were more agile are the ones that probably found it easier. So how, if people were going to implement agile working, what would you suggest to kind of make that a success?
Yeah, I think there's a few kind of principles with agile working, and one of them, I think, and this sort of plays into the sort of difficulty around defining it, is that actually it's okay for agile working to mean different things for different organizations, and that actually we might all have slightly different parameters within which we're working. So I think for me, the first one is understanding what are those parameters. Are we talking about time? Are we talking about location? Are we talking about all of the sort of elements of choice that we might be able to give people? And I think importantly for me, that's got to have congruence with the organization's values and mission. So actually there's no point in us having an agile working model that is wildly different to our sort of company ethos and culture. And I think once we've sort of got that parameters set, it's actually about understanding what are the activities, what is the work that people do. So this isn't just about beautiful designed spaces. This is really understanding what are the activities that people need to do, and how do we create spaces that support that, and not just spaces, but also how do we give people the right technology? How do we give them the right training and support and HR policies? And so there's the three components of workplace that we always talk about a lot, about technology, people, and place. And actually, your agile working proposition needs to think about all three of them as well.
Yeah, I guess as an industry, we're always caught up on definitions, and I think I'm with what Andrew was saying around that remote working. It feels like someone's potentially on an island somewhere and agile working, and yet you can be a remote worker but an agile worker. And I think, is what I would probably encourage organisations to do, is very much find what works for you. And I guess that's what you're saying, isn't it? It's, let's not call it agile working, because if you call it agile working, it's likely that your teams will go onto Google, like I probably did 10 years ago, and start Googling what does agile working mean. And then comes all the kind of prerequisites of what Google says. So I guess it's find really what the deep bit is. And Maud, I mean, what are the risks can you see with an agile kind of working model? What are the challenges that people come up against?
I think that they'll be very similar to what Dan has mentioned, actually, as a risk or as a challenge is your company culture, organization culture almost ready for that? And there's sadly some that may not yet. And this is all then the process about the change management, how you bring this to the company and their vision towards it. So I would say all of us on this panel are kind of understanding this, that piece of information that's very much about behavioral change, and not just as a user that are going to use in the end the agile space or activity-based working space, but actually the top layer as well, to understand that there is a match, between the vision, what needs to happen, and changes fundamental to the culture. And then again, that kind of sort of potential then as a risk, I would say, a lack of engagement from them. So maybe linked to trust as well, but that sort of engagement when they believe in the process, they believe there is almost a return on investment, because for some of them there will be an investment on a change management piece, on a potential refurbishment, or on that data gathering that Dan mentioned. You can't just have it's beautiful because we just made it and we had that great architect, and it has to kind of be data led. Why did we put that there? So there is an investment, and I think the lack of engagement may come from the fact that they don't see the return of it, and that's probably just my only kind of risk or challenge, I would say.
Yeah, it's what is the value of that agile working. I guess that people start arguing that it gets a little bit fluffy, and I think that's where we need to really build that business case for it. Yeah. Is there anything else got anything to add to that? No? I'll give you the opportunity. I mean, people like Bruce Daisley, for instance, he speaks about the importance of team activity, getting the team together, that group behaviour. And it's certainly over the last few months where we're not can't say we're missing the commutes. We're definitely missing being face to face with people. We're missing that collaboration, that feeling of getting people in a room and all the neuroscience behind it. And we're probably just about getting into a flow of group work, virtual, in the virtual world. And there's loads of different kind of mental health benefits and productivity aspects of all these different types of work. And I guess we've got to get a balance. But Harpreet, what do you see as that best practice to really start bringing teams together in this kind of lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, over lockdown, the people I've spoken to, the company service providers, they've really spoken about empathy and emotional intelligence as key ingredients and other soft skills, which we might call fluffy, but are really vital now to keep teams united and engaged. And for instance, someone at Seoul FM that we spoke to said these are the hardest kind of skills to practice, and it's no real secret that we're in a kind of a culture that isn't always emotionally intelligent. Like, for instance, I remember Professor Carrie Cooper at Workplace Week conference say once that managers don't have very good emotional intelligence when it comes to managing their staff. In fact, he said something along the lines of how they really kind of detrimentally affect the health of their employees if the manager isn't very good. So it's like managers are really having to kind of flex those muscles now and really kind of put them to good use. And organizations that already have a people-centric culture probably would have shifted into lockdown circumstances a bit more smoothly. Like, communication is key. It sounds obvious, I know, but just checking in on your employees and that kind of thing. When we spoke to Pareto FM, for instance, they had a few things going on to kind of simulate kind of a team atmosphere, such as employees presenting on their passion, so paintballing or something, just so that they could get excited about something that they're passionate about, and then presenting it to their whole team so they could feel that kind of sense of togetherness, not related to work necessarily, but just in bonding and that kind of thing. And I think also to kind of manage like a team spirit, you have to make sure the individuals themselves are okay. So it's about kind of checking in with individuals and checking in on their mental health and physical health. And a lot of organizations have risk assessments for employees to do to check that they're actually working in a healthy way, because everybody's just camped out in kitchens and on dining tables. And Institute of Employment Study figures have said that musculoskeletal injuries and complaints have gone up. So, are people actually looking after themselves, working from home? There's a lot for managers to do by focusing on like physical health, mental health, and then kind of making everybody feel like they're still a team and they're still in communication with each other.
Yeah, I think all the research so far is saying that soft skills are going to be the future. It's going to be definitely the hardest thing to acquire, but yet the most important. I'm very like the fluffiest fluff ball ever, so I'm looking forward to the next coming years where it's encouraged and embraced. Andrew, how do you think teams will kind of start thriving in this kind of agile, physical, dispersed kind of working way?
Well, I mean, just to add to what we've just been saying, I mean, I think the research that we've been doing basically says that there are 6 factors that make a difference to the performance of knowledge-based communities, and the top one is social cohesion, which is really kind of friendships and people feeling comfortable with each other, capable of sharing and challenging each other without necessarily being damaged by it. And I think in this particular situation we're in now, that social cohesion is even more important. And what's interesting to me is that organizations and many leaders are doing things now in a much more conscious way than they weren't doing in the old world, ironically. And we're hearing a lot of people say that they feel more connected now to their organizations than they have done in the past. And I think it's because a lot of leaders are not leaving things to chance. They're actually proactively talking to people And they're probably knowing more about each other than they ever have done as well. When they start to see the kids running in the background and the fridge magnets and all that sort of stuff, and when people are relaxed in their home environment, I think they start to become, a bit more human, particularly senior leaders who perhaps have been looked on as, powerful ogres over the years. So I think that whole thing is really important, and recognizing the need to do things which proactively create connections, not just within the team, but across teams as well, I think is critical. And the other thing that the research suggests is that in the new world, what we need are leaders who are adopting what we'll call a transformational style of management. In other words, that they act as guides, coaches, they set objectives, they set goals, but they don't, interfere too much unless things are going a little bit awry, as opposed to people who are very supervisory. And it was interesting, I was talking to a chap I know quite well recently, works for one of the big banks, and he said he'd been managed by 2 different people through this whole thing. One who was very open, very supportive, and went out of his way to create this kind of team cohesion, and another one who really didn't communicate. And he said it was very, very obvious which of these two styles was going to be needed in the future. And I think that's entirely right. What it means is you have to take your best leader and you have to kind of, make everybody at the same level, basically. And that's a huge gap, I think, for some people, particularly maybe.
This is interesting, actually, that you say this, Andrew, because I see this on some organization and even our own. And is it fair to ask for a manager that is very good at what he does, maybe know his team, but doesn't have that, and this is very difficult to acquire this, and actually we need it now. We kind of need it now. So is it fair to ask this for a manager, or should we almost have a new sort of role, and very much part of an FM actually contract with a community manager that maybe before was a co-worker and kind of that help or concierge or all of those words that we would have in the office, and I kind of bring that sort of team bond, that sort of fun way about what it is to be in an office when you're distancing, because I think sometimes it's almost unfair to ask this for manager, because you can see the difference on those two, and would you penalize one to kind of if he couldn't get that sort of emotional intelligence?
Well, I think one of the, just not wanting to hog the show, but I mean, I think one of the issues that we have in this country, and I don't think it's exclusive to us, is that we have a tendency to promote people on the basis of their technical skill quite often, and without them being promoted, they can't better themselves financially, and I think that leads us into a lot of problems, because the role of leader is really, in the new world particularly, has to be very much around these sorts of skills. We should create an opportunity to give people who've got technical skills and technical excellence the ability to rise up through the organization in a way that doesn't put them into a job that, frankly, they're not really suited to. And I think, we've got to fix that, because otherwise we're just going to end up with people who are very good technically, but they simply aren't very good at managing in the kind of world that we're heading to, in a hybrid world, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Harpreet, you mentioned, people like Pareto FM and the work that you're doing kind of day to day. What support tools have you come across that people have been finding helpful?
Well, from the people that I've been speaking to, they tend to already, like a lot of companies already tended to have a working from home kit, which includes things like physical assessment, but now I suppose they're going to have to take it a bit further and be a bit more kind of innovative, I guess, because it's not just a kind of a straightforward tick box thing, is it? Human psychology and making sure people are okay. And like a number of companies like Interserve, I remember they managers regularly keep in touch with staff just to make sure that they're keeping well for some people thrive. So I don't know exactly what that would consist of, but just kind of just checking in with people and finding ways, like I mentioned earlier, with just kind of for the sake of it, having some kind of get together that might not be related to work could be a way of managing these teams. And I do think it is going towards like a collaborative kind of effort, not just down to leaders. And this has been coming on for such a long time in business. I remember 10 odd years ago, I interviewed someone from Dragon's Den, a businesswoman from Dragon's Den, and she was telling me that the future of business is collaboration rather than competing, and that kind of adverse kind of pitting yourself against your colleague. It's more about working together. So those are the kinds of skills that I think need to be promoted and demonstrated if we are to have leaders and managers, so that employees will then, demonstrate those, and then it will just become the company culture.
Absolutely. Is there any other tools that anybody else has been kind of coming across or even working with over the 3 months?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of employee engagement kind of platform that have pop out, and the one that starts from like an employee survey, but more like a pulse, so very quick and just to monitor that, the changes, because we very much been to a roller coaster / grieving period. So it was important, I think, to get like almost day to day or weekly by week, how you're doing. So pulse survey, I would say a lot of tools about it. General, maybe longer or maybe kind of one-off survey has been quite powerful. And kind of the overall employee platform, when you would share, as kind of Harpreet was mentioning, maybe your intranet or your Slack or your Yammer, when you would be completely open about it, carve a pumpkin, show me what you've done, show me what your kids have done for craft, or how stuff like this, I think was kind of fun. We did one, again, it's fun, isn't it? So we did one, for example, where we show our lockdown hair, as in like the haircut that has not been happening. That was fun. So I think it's more about that, trying to make, I think, Andrew, you mentioned, is that sort of human in any of the employees, maybe the manager, but maybe also the leader that you would never have seen in shorts or in like, so kind of have that interaction.
Yeah, I was on a call with somebody a few weeks ago, and he had a shirt on and he stood up and he had tracksuit bottoms on the bottom half, and he were laughing about it, and I'm glad he showed me. And I think it's things like that of, well, my question would be, what's the point in the shirt? Why don't you just put a t-shirt on then if you're not going to kind of, what is the point? And I think everyone's just becoming more conscious of the kind of, we're humans, we're in our own home kind of environments generally. And I think people are just kind of reaching out more to connect with people. It's becoming more conscious. I think that's the big difference that I've seen. I remember listening to something by Moneypenny a few weeks ago now, and they use Workplace by Facebook, and they absolutely kind of love it for what it does to their engagement in their workplace. So I think it's tools like that as well from a technology point of view that will really help bring people together. So it's really positive, really. Dan, I guess we'll come back to you for a minute. And we've heard all the kind of positives of remote working, and what if you were going to look at the office of the future, for instance, all that talk early on around the office is dead, and we're all sat here wondering, is it dead? And nobody were quite sure. And after a while, we were like, it's not dead. We're panicking over nothing. And I think, what can you see the office of the future looking like?
Yeah, it's. I think it's interesting, isn't it? We're all landing, I think, in this idea of a hybrid model where we might spend some time working remotely and some time in an office. And I think, the office actually has a really valuable psychological impact for us. And, there are real benefits to us spending time in that same space together. And, for some of us, our homes are just not set up for us to be working here on a permanent basis. And even for those where it is, actually there are things like absorbing the organizational culture, you know, actually getting to know people in the organization, the far less tangible things that are actually much easier for us to do remotely, in person in the office. And so I do think that the office of the future is a place that facilitates all of that stuff. It facilitates the absorption of culture. It facilitates getting to know each other, having time together socially. And it is less about sitting at a desk doing individual focused work that you may be able to do more easily remotely. So I think it will change shape in that sense.
Yeah. Anybody else got anything to add on that?
I would tend to agree with Dan. I think the thing that is interesting to me, though, in all of this is that, you know, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, all the studies that we're doing with our clients are suggesting that, you know, the amount of space that's going to be needed is going to be substantially less, and you know, that's going to be a very interesting issue for a lot of companies, because I actually think that even as we go back, hopefully towards the middle to end of next year, to some post-COVID normality, that we will see organisations mothballing space or trying to use it in a very different way. And I think that's a really interesting issue for the industry, and whether it can really grasp that and start thinking innovatively of what you do with that, as opposed to just, you know, trying desperately to hang on to an old model.
Yeah.
This is interesting. I would almost tend to disagree with this, and it's always nice to have a agree to disagree, isn't it? But I would say that at the moment, if you think about, you know, the data that we gather from our own employees and clients, you see that people do want to come back to the office. I'm generalizing, of course, and they want to come back to the office and to do a certain type of activity, which is collaboration and meeting and gathering, and actually just sometimes seeing somebody else, right? So to gather that, and so if you combine it with the data, they want to come back maybe 2 to 3 days a week, and you can't really predict which day would be. Tend to be a Tuesday to Thursday, but you know, so you would argue that, okay, if I don't know which day they're going to come, and I know they're going to come to meet all together, then that means I actually pretty much need a lot of space if I count physical distancing, and if I count the activity-based working that you would have to have. So you will have to have those large meeting rooms to incorporate that need, and the meets were actually a requirement. You will have sort of different style and different zones, so that's another kind of requirement. You would probably also have some zone where they need to have, you know, a Zoom call with the people that were in the office to kind of then share that. So if you think about it, and the addition of all of this, to me, that's almost either like an equal meter square requirement, very different in terms of meter square, probably the same, or as you kind of mentioned, maybe the mothballing, but trying to think effectively about, okay, my grey space, can I turn it into a nursery? So then when somebody needs to come for that particular time, but she can't do anything else, which, and I say she, could be a he, by the way, they need to come to the office, then they have that sort of, you know, capabilities and amenities to do it. Or should I have like a cocktail bar, and so they come and they can have that sort of banter that they were terribly missing out. So I do like that talk about the grey space that is going to come.
Yeah, I think, you know, it shows the importance of using data, doesn't it? Because we could look at data pre-pandemic, and if you look at, you know, the average kind of occupancy of an office, you could then look at it now and think, well, if people are going to go to 3 days, we're going to need smaller spaces. But I think that's almost seeing the office as a cost per square foot. I think if we can look at it at a value per square foot and say, actually, from the perspective of, we still want this much space because it means that we're going to put that nursery in there. You can tell Maud obviously works in employee experience, by the way. But, you know, it's almost the, what can we do with that space? But, you know, people are, I've been speaking to some organisations, they've got probably another 8 to 10 years left on some of the leases. So it's how quickly people are going to start reducing that square footage down in it as well. And, you know, I can't imagine there's going to be too many landlords that are just going to allow people to walk away from the space easily. So
No,
it's going to be interesting.
I think, Simone, I think I entirely agree with that. I think the issue that we see is because we've identified about 4 different occupancy models, really. You know, there's the people who are going to be in the office every day because of some regulatory or really hugely important business reason why they need to be there together to work with people. And then there's going to be, you know, at the other end of the spectrum, people who frankly don't want to come into the office. They'll only ever do it once in a while. And then in between those two positions, you know, we've got another model where, you know, people are working away, but actually do want to come into the office maybe once a week or once every month or something at the same time so that they can be cohesive. So we've got this kind of mix. The interesting thing is that the office of the future is going to have to cope with all of these. And if we don't adopt a much more flexible activity-based model, basically we're going to find that there are pockets of space all over the place. They're just going to be dead on certain days of the week. So consolidating occupancy won't be just an issue of, you know, utilization of space. It'll be an issue of atmosphere and energy and buzz and stuff. And you know, that's the way I think we're beginning to see how it's all going to pan out. You know, so the mothballing isn't really just a carbon or a cost issue. It's also about creating energy in a building that will, you know, largely be underoccupied.
Yeah, we never know. It might be like the football grounds and pump some fake noise in when we've got no crowd. It's going to be an interesting few months ahead, I think. And well, Dan, I know you're kind of you're the well advanced practitioner as well, aren't you? So this will be a good question for you, really. But you know, from that psychological element of the office, do you think there's still kind of the physical element? Do you think there's still a lot there in that psychological, what the office brings to somebody's kind of mental well-being?
Definitely, yeah. For all of the sort of experiential reasons we've talked about, I absolutely think there's a real benefit to spending time in the office. I know for myself, over this summer, the brief moments where I've been able to be in an office space with colleagues and spend time with people have been hugely beneficial. You know, for some of us, actually, I know, Simone, you said you don't miss your commute, but actually some people do miss that, not because they love sitting on a train or what have you, but because it actually gives you that separation between life and work. And for some of us, we need that space. And, you know, there is a real psychological mental health benefit to having that separation for some people, and maybe not all of the time, but the ability to do that a couple of days a week, I think, is going to be really, really helpful for a lot of us.
Yeah, I mean, I chose to go to an office on Friday because I think I just got to that point of I need to get out of the house. So I drove to Northampton, quite enjoyed that 2-hour commute, listening to podcasts, 2 hours drive back, seeing teammates in the actual flesh. It's always nice. And I think it is, you know, no, I don't want to go back to doing that kind of every day. Not that I was doing that every day anyway, but you know, I think it's got to be about the balance and the tasks that you're doing, hasn't it? I guess we're all kind of agreed on that. I mean, anybody else got anything to add to that around that kind of psychological impact of the office?
I just wanted to add that, you know, yes, psychological, but it is also physical, because I don't know anyone who hasn't put on a few pounds during lockdown, because just, you know, movement of going to work, commuting, it's kind of linked. It's not like you can't really. I don't think you can really always separate it from the psychological benefit. So that's, I think, also quite an important factor to take in.
Yeah, totally.
The interesting thing, though, I mean, I would concur with what you just said, Harpreet, if we didn't have an alternative. I mean, it's quite interesting. You know, people are working at home in a very kind of intense way at the moment, and you know, it starts early because probably we think we are, or people think we should be using the time we were using for commuting for working, and then there's just a flood of calls and stuff, often without much of a gap between them. And it's interesting to me that we've been kind of given the opportunity to be flexible, but we're not really taking it. So, you know, one of the things that I've tried to do during this period is to cut a slice out in the middle of my day, so that I just basically go for a walk for about an and if necessary, I'll do a call while I'm on the walk. Now, it's interesting that not a lot of people have altered their modus operandi, even though they potentially could do. And I think this is one of the things that organisations are going to have to think hard about, is how they create rituals, if you like. I mean, I'm speaking, from Spain at the moment, because we moved out here to enjoy the warmth. We didn't want lockdown and cold. But what they do here, they have the siesta. And, really between 2 and 4, 2 and 5, you can't do anything physical. Now, I almost think we've got to start rethinking the way we work to give people that kind of break in the day, because otherwise it's just, if you just keep working and working and working and working, after many months, I just feel you just become exhausted, mentally exhausted.
I was speaking to Amanda Cookson, who's a coach, about this a few weeks ago, and we were saying around all the neuroscience of, you used to go into school, you used to be in a certain environment, you used to be in the kind of 8:30 till 3:30, being told that that's when you do it, and being told, yes, you need to sit down and be quiet, and all that kind of social conditioning that comes with that. Is this now our opportunity as kind of adults to kind of rebel backwards? When the clocks changed a few weeks ago, I think I went a few days where I didn't actually see daylight because I was going out late afternoon, it was pitch black. So I changed my calendar up, and now I've got an hour of walking and talking in the morning that I can get some fresh air, do some phone calls, like you just said, Andrew, just keeping some normality. I'm not a morning person anyway, so for me it made sense, and I felt so much better for it. So I think we all need to kind of know ourselves, having that awareness, and adjust our working styles, and not be scared of kind of all that stuff around agile guilt and presenteeism in a virtual world. Not be scared of that. And I think that's one thing that we're probably overcautious of at the moment. We want to be seen to be being online at a certain time and ending at a certain time. So I'm going to urge everybody to start rebelling against that. But don't tell your bosses that it was me that I said to do that. So I mean, over to Maud. Your role is very kind of employee experience. For the kind of future, that kind of configuration of the office, you've talked a little bit about what that could look like. Do you think open plan will remain a thing?
Yeah, I love those type of questions. I think open plan will remain, and then we have already established on this talk that there's a lot of data to be gathered before. So again, you don't just do an open plan because it's the trend, you just do it because it does suit what the business wants, right? So let's park the fact that you have gathered your data, and then you have established that having an open plan is great. One of the best outcome ever, right, of open plan has been activity-based working. So yes, you do have an open plan, yet you have those sort of zones, whatever it is, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It could be a rug on the floor, a lick of paint that kind of established as another zone, signage to say, like on the quiet cranes, so you establish that part. So I would say that, open plan will remain, as much as, again, the company is this is the vision and this is what they need to grow, especially if you go for the activity-based working model. So I think, to me, that's one of the best parts of open plan. I think this is where maybe, and Andrew might be best to do this for the description perspective, is open plan mixing with hot desking? So if open plan is mixing with hot desking and there's too much noise and I can't concentrate, clearly there is something that we need to think about. So there's open plan, I'm saying yes, if you do it kind of right, and then again based on the data, you say, okay, so kind of like people have said they want to come back to work to do these activities, I'm going to create those zones. Yet there will be some freestyle zones as well where they can go. But I would still remain a firm believer in open plan, and especially when you see how much people want to come back to an office to see people, I would say this is actually quite fundamental that it stays open as much as you can. And I know not all jobs and not all activities can be done that way. And worst case scenario, then you create some sort of flexible, dividing. So you create a a curtain that maybe is acoustic as much as, made of recycled fishing nets, and then you kind of have the whole thing. You have a potential open space, and if you do want to have that creation of mini space, you kind of close it up. So I'm open plan. Yeah.
Do you think it's kind of COVID has done this irreversible change to how people are working, or do you think it's just kind of speeded up something that was happening anyway?
Oh, I would hope. A lot of people are saying it has just speed it up. Right. I would hope, but I think we know that there are some companies that just never even had that on their radar. I guess what COVID has done is probably the fact that we just can't go back now. And that's a very important factor of a change management, change experience. You can't go back now. Once you open the Pandora box, it's open. Now it's how you manage that and how you're gonna just making sure that you're not reverting back, and the trust is still there, and the kind of investment into your people is still there, I would say. So hopefully speeding up.
Definitely feel like it's out of the bottle. So I've got Andrew, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, what I observe, and I'm sure Dan and Maud will do this as well, is that there's a bit of a battle going on in some companies, between those people who really just want this to go away and we can go back to the old world, and those people who have seen it as an opportunity to, really drive a change agenda. And I think it's, certainly in the last few days, as you've begun to see the potential vaccine, which could bring us all back to some sort of post-COVID normal in a little while, I almost get the impression that some people are breathing a sigh of relief that we don't have to change, we're okay, we can carry on with it. But I actually think that the momentum now, if used correctly by influential leaders, can keep this movement going. I'm sure there are going to be some companies that don't, actually, just because of the power of some of the leaders who, maybe are in their later years and they just don't want anything to change. They really don't, because this whole thing isn't just about space and working in different places. It's about hierarchy and power as well.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see some interesting battles going on. But I think the difference between the companies that do grab it and run with it and those that don't will become very apparent very quickly, both in terms of their ability to recruit and retain the right people, but also from a competitiveness standpoint. So yeah, so it's a fascinating game that we're watching, I think.
Yeah. I do quite a lot of work with kind of legal sector, and you can see even within a legal sector that some people are we want to recruit the latest graduates, we need to change, but then some are very much clinging on to that corner office that they always envisioned having, and I think that's where that power that you say kind of comes in. Dan, have you got any thoughts around any of this?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting challenge, isn't it? I was going to say I agree with what Maud was saying and with Andrew that actually this is a change that would have happened anyway. It might have taken us 10, maybe even 20 years to get to where we are now. The challenge that we have is that because we've not had that long time to gradually let this change settle in and allow people to move at different rates, that we're going to see people snapping back to old behaviours, which is exactly what you've both just talked about. And I think our challenge collectively is how do we actually make sure that we capitalise on the real benefits from what we've learned over the course of the last 9 months and longer, and not let it just snap back because there's a vaccine and we can go back to normal, whatever that means.
Yeah. I think, we've kind of covered a little bit around the square footage and what the size of it's going to be, and there's also probably something else considering that it's really nice having quite a lot of space around you, isn't it? Like, I'm looking forward to the time next time I go on the tube where I don't have to have my face maybe in someone's armpit. And I think, that's what we've got used to, having that element of space. Andrew, how do you think things like that are going to start affecting that real estate planning?
Well, I mean, I think there's an optimum amount of space, to create both the right atmosphere and give people the right places to do what they need to do, and also to look at it from a carbon standpoint. I mean, it seems to me, one of the things that this whole thing has brought forward is a greater appreciation of what sort of activities are best done where. So if you look at all the statistics, lots of people who do focused work are saying they work better at home because they're not getting interruption, which is what they get in a very, poorly defined open plan environment. But the same is also true at the other end. I think people are now much more appreciative of the things that they need physical space for in a way that they probably weren't before, So I think there's an interesting optimum balance to be had, and it can only really happen through a very thoughtful research, orientated approach. And I think that's something that I think people are beginning to tune into much more than perhaps they were, a while back. But I would agree entirely with what you said before. I think we've been on this journey for a long time. I mean, I'm sure that the studies that you've all done in your project work are the same as ours. People have been asking for greater levels of flexibility for a long time. They simply haven't been able to get it because those with the power to make it happen have been reluctant to let the genie get out of the bottle, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else got anything to add to any of that?
I think I would just add, Simone, that, to your question about the sort of space need, that actually linking back to what Maud said earlier, I'm in agreement here that I don't think that this is going to be a race to the bottom for a lot of people. There are certainly organisations that we are working with that want to use this as an opportunity to have a very ambitious space reduction target, or to make sure that their space is rationalised. But then there are others who recognise that if we are going to an office to collaborate, some of those collaborative activities can be very space hungry things, actually. And you've said about being used to having more space around as well. For some organisations, this is an opportunity to strip out the call centre like banks and banks of desks and make way for something that is much more welcoming, much more inviting, and is much better geared up to those collaborative activities. So yeah, I think there's a lot still to be seen for office space.
Yeah, no, definitely. We talk, sort of a lot around the soft skills and data and how important these things are going to be in the future. Andrew, what are your thoughts around, how that workplace kind of leader, FM role will evolve and change in the future?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that I felt for quite some time, and I think quite a number of other people felt the same way too, is that if we believe quite genuinely there are people and their brains are the most important asset that we have in the knowledge world that we're all heading rapidly towards, then it seems to me quite an interesting question as to who's managing the workplace experience. Now, if you think about all the different parties that are currently involved in that, we've got technology, we've got networks, we've got people around space, we've got FM, all sorts of different people. And it seems to me, we also got the added complexity of having people who are not always in the physical container called an office. So my sense is that one way or the other, we have to evolve to a new model. And I think we've talked about it as being what we'll call workplace management, which is somebody taking responsibility for the total experience that people are having, regardless of where they are and what the technical nature of that experience is. And so I do still hold out a hope that we might end up with these new roles, chief workplace officer, similar to the one that you used to operate with, Simone, or chief experience officer, somebody who isn't necessarily taking responsibility for all of the different lines of activity, somebody who is acting very proactively on behalf of the consumer in the workplace to get all of those different silos lined up to deliver something which is very coherent and effective and smooth and frictionless. So I hold out some hope that somebody will see that as an opportunity, and I think if not now, when really?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think, that chief workplace officer role is definitely one that I kind of keep beating the drum with people and saying you should have one of these. I certainly learned kind of on the ground of the importance of that role, and I can't even imagine how important it is now in the sense of the world that we're in now. So definitely organisations kind of need to start looking at that a little bit in more detail maybe and see the value of it. It's interesting. Do you think ultimately, I guess it's a question for everybody, so let's do a quick yes or no. Do you think we're going to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, or do you think we're going to ultimately really start to change the workplace kind of sector and keep up the momentum that we've achieved? So if we do a quick yes or no, I'll go in order that I can see you. So Andrew?
Well, I think I'm not sure whether it's a yes or no, but I certainly we have to keep moving forward. I think otherwise, there's no doubt in my mind, that there is going to become something of a competition between the different disciplines, in this area. So I think you've got to keep moving forward. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do, it seems to me.
Yeah. We've got Dan?
I think, yes, we will learn from the experience. I don't think it will be easy, but yes, we have to.
Yeah. Preet?
Yes, I think it's inevitable. I don't think it can go back exactly. I think, too much has happened. So we're going to have to go into the future with a bit of a different perspective.
Yeah. And then Maud? Oh, you're on mute. I thought we were doing too well.
Oh, we needed that sentence at one point, we needed it. I'm glad I've I think yes, as people have said as well, like we have to, and it's got to be, and I think for the sake of it, and you were mentioning the word rebel, we should not even rebel, we should just keep on pushing that, and why not change a lot of other stuff what we had. So hopefully that's a yes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Harpreet, you've obviously done a lot of kind of research. You speak to a lot of people. What do you think our profession needs to do next to make sure that the baby doesn't go out with the bathwater? How can we almost start enforcing that these things maintain the momentum that we've got? I guess. Do you think it's going to be a ground up, or do you think it's going to be up to key leadership?
Probably a bit of both. I think that if businesses are going to be sensible, this has to be a part of their long-term strategy, because we don't know when another virus might happen. I mean, I'm sure nobody expected this year to happen like it did, and the businesses that had kind of flexible work, people-centric policies already, they probably fared much better than the ones that couldn't adapt. And I feel like it's an opportunity for FM function to kind of push that forward. I talked to Chris Kane recently, who used to be head of corporate real estate at BBC, and he's just written a book. And he was saying that FM was often seen as the poor relation in the real estate family, but now it was its chance to actually put itself forward. And I really feel like just having written about everything that's been going on over the last few months, I just feel like it really has, been center stage for FM, and it's the perfect opportunity for them to push agile working and other sorts of things, because people are going to be so dependent on the services that it provides. I just feel like it's common sense, and businesses will need to adapt. And it's also just about making sure everybody can work. So if you kind of deal with the kind of lowest common denominator, if you can ensure that we can see ourselves through a pandemic, then we can work well when there's not a pandemic. It's just about having that kind of safeguard in place. I remember writing about the earthquake in New Zealand, and I spoke to an FM there who she said that nobody ever notices FM until there's a disaster of some sort. And I'm sure you've all heard that many times. And I feel like it's often, the people who look after things in the background that are not noticed until they're really needed. So this is a chance for them to actually push for things that will just make life easy for everybody, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're going to go over to some questions now from the audience, and we've got a few in, but if anybody else has got any more that you want to submit, go for it and we'll get round to them. So the first one is, how have the panel adjusted to remote working? What's the kind of the biggest challenges that we've come across? And that's from Martin at Mace. So start with Andrew. Oh, we're on mute. Yeah, can hear you now.
So what I was going to say was, we haven't made an adjustment at all because we've always worked in this way, even since the time we set the business up. So, you know, our whole organizational model is based upon, you know, people working all over the world using things like Teams and you know, other tools to work effectively. So no difference for us, just more intense.
Yeah, yeah. What about Dan?
Yeah, I guess similar in a way. We used to sort of have this hybrid model previously with some time working from home and some time in the office. I think what's changed for me is that my days at home used to be the days for sort of focused work, and now actually that separation between focused work and collaboration has gone, and everything just sort of happens at home now. And so that is something that's changed. I think for me personally, it's about being more disciplined, and actually that's my sort of personal challenge all the time, is to not come back to the place that I'm sat now to work at any time just because it happens to be in the house. And so I think that I'm sure there are others who are sort of feeling that same struggle. Yeah, so sort of building in better structure, I think for me is the biggest change.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Harpreet?
I feel quite fortunate because I feel like in my job I just have to get my head down and focus and get the work done, and so working from home and pretty much doing the same kind of thing. Obviously less team interaction and collaboration, but we have calls and that kind of thing, so it's quite balanced. It's been quite a smooth transition, I would say. So
Yeah. What about yourself, Maud?
I think it is always difficult to say. You have to understand that obviously my company being a construction and FM company, we have a lot of people that their job depends on being in a building. So from that point onwards, to talk about them, I think that's been hard. You know, obviously a front of house team kind of can't really do what they're supposed to do or what they want to do. So, but then in another way, there's also, and we mentioned this a little bit before, that sort of pride about doing the work now. So I'm taking the cleaning team because it's sometimes what people think FM is just, but it's very relevant. So the cleaning team is now proud to be part of this sort of FM, because people not only are seeing them and want to see them, but also ask their questions and, you know, come to them and say, what we're using, have you cleaned this? Or even further, you move into that sort of IoT. And so, you know, there's a bit of both. I think we had some struggle because of the type of work we're doing, but there's also been some sort of joy that came out of it. And personally, I'm a kind of bit of like Dan, so it's been hard. I have tried to personalize what is now my home office, trying to make it as much as I can, but I'm a people person and I'm a workplace experience, so I really need other people and a much bigger workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else kind of got any final thought on that aspect before we go over to the next question? No. So one thing that has come through is, do we have any recommendations for desk booking software? So I guess there's so many out there at the moment, isn't there? Is there any particular one that you're using or you're deploying with your customers that you'd recommend?
Yeah, we've deployed a couple, and I have to say the most interesting again is to find out what is it that you want to achieve, isn't it? So what clients at the moment have asked is two things. The major one is almost a track and trace to sort of have, making sure that if the office has to remain open for, I know we are on lockdown, but there's some offices that are required to be open. So, if you're looking into this, then this is a system that's going to be very efficient, almost like a back-end reporting with the monitoring, potentially linking it to a visitor management system, maybe to your desk sensors if you can implement it. So you know exactly who came, what they booked, where they booked, and how long they stayed. So you can kind of manage that track and trace. And there's another one factor, it's much more on that progression of coming back to the office and that return to the office is desk booking, yes, but to really understand, have they actually booked the desk booking to just be allowed to come in the office? And this is where you'll see that they will book a desk to come to the office, but actually they won't use it. And this is the combination again with the desk booking and the desk kind of utilization desk sensor. So I would say trying to find out what is the company is looking to do to achieve, and then ask some suppliers about those criteria. What can they do about it?
I'd just say one of the companies we work with is a company called Workplace Fabric, which is a company I was, proud to be involved in the formation of, quite a few years ago. And what the guys there have done is to look at this in a slightly different way, and to not think about it as booking, but think about it as resource management. So in other words, even the idea of potentially, redefining the position of teams, scheduling overnight what people need, where they need it, so that every day you may turn up and find that your team is in a slightly different place. Because I think that plays again to this issue about, capacity and managing capacity in a more dynamic way in the future. So I'd certainly recommend, you take a look at Workplace Fabric and Free Space, which is the product they've developed.
Yeah, and there's so many out there at the moment. You could look at things like iOffice, there's GoSpace, there's Condeco. They're all kind of, it's about, we've got to get to what is it you're trying to achieve. And I think there's a desk booking for track and trace, or you could look at something more like, I don't know, iOffice, that is very kind of future-proof in the organisation as a workplace kind of IWMS. So I guess it depends what angle you're coming at, doesn't it? And hopefully we've answered that. I'll give you some more insight, Paul, but obviously you can reach out to any of us if you want to talk more on any of that as well. Just so we're not sucking up. Got about another 15 questions, so I'll whiz through some of these now. How do we keep collaboration alive? Anybody want to say anything on that?
There's a great saying by the Yahoo CEO that says people are more productive when they're alone, but they're more innovative and collaborative when they're together. So the only tool that you need to really think about is that the office, right? So making sure that you have a space where they can come, because we will be allowed to come at some point. If we talk about today, right now, as we are on lockdown, I think a lot of people mentioned it before, is to have that communication, isn't it? Trying to making sure that you communicate. And maybe what we did mention also before is that sort of engagement tools, have a platform, we use actually for the desk booking technology, which are great because they not only do the desk booking, but they also allow other feature like, a chat, report a fault, talk to have a pulse survey. So I think it is interesting to have also those tools eventually.
Yeah, another interesting one that's just come in is how can we get people in the office on a Monday and a Friday? Then we don't have, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday full, and Monday and Friday like a ghost town. What are people's thoughts around that?
Well, my view on that is that we've got to work hard on two sides of the equation. One is we've got to make it more attractive for people to come in on a Monday and Friday. So it may be we run special events, or we make discounts on food, or we have a special celebrity chef in on a Monday or a Friday, or we have the beers at 5 o'clock or something. I think we've got to work on that side. And then on the other side of the equation, I think in the new world there are going to be some groups, if you like, that make decisions about when they're going to be in the office. And I think we need to make sure that those groups are rotating in a sense, as opposed to necessarily everybody coming in on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Because if you do the numbers on some of these, as we have, it's ridiculous. You just end up with large swathes of space empty on a Monday and a Friday, and you'll be rammed on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we've got to proactively manage that in a way that I don't think we've managed it before.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to merge a few questions together here. The gist of it is, all them sayings around change your space, change your culture, and how important the space is for the culture and that sense of belonging to the organisation. How do we think remote working is going to impact on some of this? If there might be people that never have to come into an office, there might be organisations that choose to kind of allow and embrace that. But how can we ensure that culture comes through into remote working? Any ideas? That's why people are asking.
I
Well,
think this comes into your digital workspace as well as your physical workspace, and it's about the way that we talk to each other and the way that the company, whoever your employer is, talks to you. What are the things that they say and do? That is what makes culture. Now, we can see that very visibly when we're in an office space, but there are ways for us to do that digitally as well. Being transparent and being open is something that we can do without having to have glass everywhere. These are things that we can do digitally. So it's not as intuitive, it's not as natural for us to do that, but it requires an awful lot of thought about what we're saying and how we're saying it, and how that links back to our culture, but we can do that.
So I would agree with that, Dan. I mean, I take a slightly different approach on this because, our business has never had what we might call a traditional office. And anybody who joins our business knows there is a very visible culture, even though we're not physically in the same space all the time. And that comes from, I think, the way that we behave with each other, the way that the voice we use, the way we encourage people to connect and communicate online, and the way we care for people when they're in a bad spot. So I think culture doesn't necessarily, I think it's helpful to have it reinforced with a physical, central presence. But I think culture for me is much more, it potentially transcends all that sort of stuff. And but you have to work much harder at it when you're working in a much more remote style of operation. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah. Anybody else got any thoughts, Maud, Harpreet?
Yeah, I would say really work on the onboarding process, and that's very linked to what Dan and Andrew said. So about the digital way that you're now going to do, thinking of people that never been in the office, so the younger generation that would come, or our apprentices and graduates this year. That was hard, much harder, and you have to remember yourself, if you're a bit of a more experienced type of role. When you started in the office, you were so glad to have somebody that showed you not only this is where the coffee machine is and this, but more like, some sort of niblet of information that you couldn't get anywhere else. So how do you get that? They would say, or making sure that you go through that door, because it's always like, and all of these things, how do you transform this? So I would say the onboarding program needs to be rethink, and almost again having maybe those new roles created, where we talked about a few roles, but that sort of community manager that makes sure that says, you should talk to Harpreet, she's great at this and she has experience at that, and she will tell you about this. And so maybe having those thoughts on the onboarding to me would be crucial. And eventually you could kind of have this repeat, maybe every 6 months you have you've been here for a long time, but how about you come to talk to other people about the organization, your pride of working for them.
And then the last question, because that's all we've got time for, but it's come up a few times this over the last few webinars that I've seen and heard and been on and things. And one of the things that people are struggling with is we're going to have this workforce ultimately that are still communicating with Teams and Zoom and things, and then we're going to have people in the office. In that dispersed kind of way of working, how are we going to be able to control the noise within the workplace? How are we going to create new zones? Is it all come down to acoustics? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the office is going to be noisier than it was before for exactly that reason. We are still going to have a lot of these remote first meetings, even when some of us are in an office. And I think for a lot of reasons, that's the right thing to do, because it gives us a greater equality of experience when we're all joining something remotely rather than some of us in a room and some remote. But that does give us challenges, doesn't it? So again, this comes back to the idea of planning how you work based on the activities that you're doing. So actually, if you really need heads down, focused work and quiet to do that, this is where quiet rooms and phone booths or private working spaces really come into their own. Or, you know, continuing to work remotely for a part of your week in order to get those heads down focused activities done. It requires a level of planning that we haven't necessarily been used to before, but I do think that it means that we use a range of different spaces for different activities, and actually, you know, unfortunately, I think it does mean that the open plan office might be noisier than it was before.
Yeah, can't wait for that. So from a final kind of summary, 30 seconds each, what's your key takeaway from the last kind of hour and a half that we've been kind of chatting through some of these things, these challenges? We start with Andrew.
Well, I mean, it seems to me the name of the game is you know, really grabbing hold of this thing that people are calling the COVID dividend, which is really trying to make the most of what we've got and move forward as best we can and not slip back to the old world, really.
Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's about really understanding what benefits agile working can bring for an organization. Let's not just take the book off the shelf and follow the recipe that is here. Let's tailor this and make sure that it works for the organizational culture and the activities that we're each individually doing.
Yeah. Free?
I think that there's a way to be robust, but also adaptable and kind of going with the flow. And it's about balancing that and just being ready for any further changes that might take place. There's talk of climate change being a big thing in the COVID recovery plan. So maybe a workplace of the future will revolve around like 15-minute cities where, you know, there is local workspaces and things. So just be open to kind of improvement in like the future, of the vision of the future, but kind of keeping your feet on the ground and being robust and implementing the policies that are working.
Yeah. And then Maud?
Yeah, I was thinking about the all of the definition we gave and how sometimes still it could be confusing. So I would say have a flexible working policy. It's not a nice to have anymore. You need to have this. This is mandatory. Think agile working. So really about that sort of state and that flexibility that you keep in mind. But so think agile working, and then create activity-based working. So making sure that you have almost all of that in sort of, you know, a layer. No matter how you know how long it might take, but I would say all of the three together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think it's been a really good conversation. I could happily sit here for another hour, but we'd best not, because I'm sure we'll get kicked off at some point. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Please reach out if you've got any further questions. You can obviously contact IWFM, or you can probably find us on LinkedIn as well. Take a look at the Insight Hub. There's lots of kind of good practice guides in there, and just a bit of a go-to really, especially around, you know, the COVID-19. How can ultimately we learn as an industry from each other? We kind of, I think, you know, Maud captured it earlier. This isn't about competition. There's enough pie for everybody, and I think we need to start sharing that and helping each other as an industry to really kind of recover from, you know, what's happened and what's going to come next as well. So there's the email address, policy@iwfm.org.uk. If you've got any questions or anything, and if you've got any case studies as well of how you've been dealing with things like what we've been talking about today over the last 8 months, you know, pop them into IWFM and they can work with you on that. So thank you everybody, and take care.